The sound of chairs pushing back from tables hit me before I fully understood what was happening. I'd been sitting near the back of the room trying to stay invisible, nursing a glass of sweet tea, and watching my father laugh with his old baseball buddies from across the room, when a man at the table beside me, gray-haired, broad-shouldered, a 101st Airborne pin on his lapel, glanced at my sleeve, at my combat infantrywoman badge. Then slowly, deliberately, he stood up. Then the man beside him stood. Then the entire table. Then, from somewhere near the buffet line, a retired sergeant major I had never met in my life squared his shoulders and called out across my father's 60th birthday party, in a voice that carried 30 years of parade grounds behind it. Room. Attenhut. The DJ cut the music. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. My sister Claire's hand went flat against her chest like she'd been startled awake. And my father, the man who had texted me 4 days earlier asking me, please, not to wear my uniform to his party, because he didn't want things to get complicated, turned around and looked at me like he was seeing someone he didn't recognize. I am 31 years old. I've been an army captain for 4 years. I've done 2 combat deployments, one to Kuwait and one to a location I'm still not allowed to name on the internet, and I have never once felt as exposed as I did in that moment, standing in a banquet hall in Gallatin, Tennessee, while 30-something veterans came to attention for me at my own father's birthday party. I want to tell you that felt like justice. I'd imagined something like it. Late at night, driving back to base after another visit home, where he'd changed the subject every time someone asked about my service, but standing there with every eye in that room on me, the last thing I felt was triumphant. My name is Delia Marsh, and this is the story of the night my father finally saw me, and why it turned out to be nothing like I expected. Growing up in Gallatin, I was the daughter who didn't fit. My sister Claire was the one our parents understood. Cheerleading, honor society, the kind of easy warmth that made adults say, she's going places, without ever really meaning she'd go far. She stayed. She married a good man named Philip. She remembered every birthday in the family, organized dinners, knew exactly which flowers to bring to whose house. She was the daughter my parents had a grammar for. I was the one who stayed up watching History Channel documentaries about Desert Storm at 13, who argued with my history teacher about why women couldn't serve in direct combat roles, who read news articles about Fallujah the way other girls in 8th grade read celebrity magazines. My father, Roy Marsh, coached baseball at Gallatin High School for 28 years. He is a genuinely good man. I need to say that clearly. He coached hundreds of boys through the years, showed up when his players were in crisis, drove to hospitals in other counties when kids got hurt. But Roy Marsh believed in a specific shape of life for his daughters, and that shape was safe, close to home, and comprehensible. The Army was none of those things. When I came home from my freshman year of college and told him I'd joined Army ROTC, he set down his fork. Not dramatically, just set it down, carefully, and said, "You'll drop out of it by spring." I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. I had learned by then that his predictions about me came packaged as facts, and the only way to disprove them was to simply go away and do the thing. When I commissioned as a second lieutenant at 22, he came to the ceremony. He shook my hand. He took one photograph. Then, on the drive home, I heard this from my mother a year later. He told her he hoped I'd get it out of my system before I got myself hurt. 9 years later, 2 deployments later, a combat infantrywoman badge, a Bronze Star, and 200 soldiers who'd gone downrange under my leadership later, still hadn't gotten it out of my system. Our phone calls had shortened over the years until they were down to the basics. Whether, Claire's kids, whether the Titans had any shot. He never asked about my work. I stopped offering. Then, 4 days before his birthday party, I was at my apartment at Fort Campbell sorting through a pile of mail that had backed up during my last rotation when my phone buzzed. A text from my father. "Claire mentioned you're planning to come in uniform. I'd rather you just come as yourself. No need to make it a whole thing." I read that message 3 times. Come as yourself. As if the uniform wasn't me. As if the 9 years and the deployments and the decisions I'd made in the dark and the noise. As if all of it was a costume I could take off for a weekend to make his birthday more comfortable. I sat with that for a long time. Outside my window, the October light was going flat and gold across the parking lot. I could hear football on TV from the unit next door. I poured a glass of water and stood at my kitchen counter. And thought seriously about calling Claire and saying I wasn't coming. Then, my phone rang. Terrence Odom. Retired Master Sergeant, first platoon sergeant I ever had, the man who taught me how to read a room and how to hold one. He'd somehow heard through the loose, persistent network that always operates between soldiers. "Tell me you're not skipping your father's birthday," he said immediately. He texted me not to wear my uniform. A pause. "What are you going to do?" I was thinking about staying home. Delia. He said my name the way he used to when I was 22 and about to make a mistake. Patient, firm, utterly certain. You have spent 9 years serving people who have no idea what it costs. Don't let one text make you small. I don't want to make his birthday about me. Showing up as who you are is not making it about you, he said. Don't confuse those two things. I pressed my forehead against the cabinet and breathed. You matter, Terrence said quietly, even when they act like you don't. I went to my closet, took out my army service uniform, green and gold, every ribbon and badge in its correct position. I ran my hand slowly across the fabric. People imagine uniforms make you feel powerful. Sometimes they just remind you of what you paid for them. The drive from Clarksville to Gallatin takes about an hour on a clear traffic day. I drove it with a country station, playing low and the windows cracked, watching Middle Tennessee scroll past. Horse farms, grain silos, small Baptist churches with their message boards out front. The kind of landscape that looks exactly the way it did when I left it at 18, and nothing like what I'd spent 9 years protecting an abstraction of. The venue was a banquet hall Claire had rented near the town square. White tablecloths, a DJ, a photo booth in the corner with Roy's 60th in balloon letters above it. My mother found me near the entrance, Helen Marsh, in the blue dress she'd worn to Claire's baby shower 2 years back. Her expression already doing the particular thing it does when she's calculating emotional damage. Delia. She touched my arm. You made it. Hi, Mom. Her eyes moved over my uniform. Quick, your father. I know what he said. She pressed her lips together. He just didn't want things to get complicated. I had heard versions of that sentence my entire life. He just didn't want. Let's not make it difficult. Maybe just this once. I knew by now that complicated was code for anything that required my father to hold a version of me he didn't have words for. He found me about 3 minutes later. Roy Marsh at 60 is still a large man, broad-shouldered, moves with the practiced authority of someone who spent decades managing teenagers on a baseball field. He saw my uniform, and his jaw went quiet and controlled. I thought I was clear, he said. You were. This is my birthday, Delia. I know, I drove an hour to be here. He shook his head and walked back toward his baseball league friends, and I felt the familiar hollowing out that I'd been carrying since I was 17. Not rage, not even clean sadness. Just the long, specific tiredness of never quite landing with him, no matter how far I'd traveled or what I'd done in the time between visits. Claire found me at the drinks table 20 minutes later. She looks like our mother, same dark eyes, same way of tilting her head when she's worried. She hugged me hard, then stepped back. You know he's going to be difficult about it all night. He already has been. She glanced around the room. I'm not saying you were wrong to wear it, You're saying, shrink yourself. She blinked. That's not what I meant. I know it's not. And it wasn't. Claire has never been cruel to me. She just learned early that peace in our family required managing our father's discomfort, and she'd be skilled at it. I didn't blame her. I'd spent years doing the same thing. I found a table near the back and sat with a plate I barely touched. The DJ was playing Springsteen and Tom Petty. Aunts and uncles I hadn't seen in years waved across the room. I waved back and practiced looking like someone who was fine. The table beside mine had 8 veterans at it. I'd noticed them when I walked in. VFW members, mostly in their 60s and 70s, and one younger man around 30 with an 82nd Airborne Combat patch on his jacket. They'd been talking quietly among themselves, and I'd nodded when I sat down, and that had been the extent of it. Until the younger man glanced at my sleeve. I saw him register the Combat Infantrywoman badge. Then the deployment patch. Then my rank. His posture did the thing soldiers' postures do when they're making a calculation. He leaned slightly forward. Captain Marsh, he asked quietly. I turned. I didn't know him. You don't know me, he said, but my older brother served in your company in Kuwait. 3rd rotation. He said you pulled 2 guys out of a vehicle after an IED hit the lead truck in his convoy. He paused. He called our mom from Landstuhl after he got stateside again. Said you were the reason his whole fire team made it back. I didn't know what to say. These moments always catch me sideways. You make decisions in motion, in noise, in the confusion of an incident, and then years later someone tells you at a birthday party in Tennessee that those decisions are the reason their brother still calls home on Sunday nights. I remember that convoy was all I could get out. He nodded, then he stood up, quietly, no announcement, just stood. The man beside him looked up and stood. Then the whole table. I felt it before I fully saw it. The particular stillness that moves through a room when something shifts underneath it. The DJ noticed. The music faded mid-song. Voices trailed off in clusters around the room. The sergeant major near the buffet table turned around, assessed the situation in about 2 seconds, and made a decision. Room, Aten Hut. It came out of him the way commands come out of men who've given them for 30 years. Not especially loud. Absolute. 30-something people in that room came to attention. Veterans. 2 younger men I hadn't noticed who were clearly active duty. In civilian clothes but giving themselves away completely. An ROTC cadet who must have been a friend of a friend. They were all looking at me. I rose slowly from my chair. The DJ was completely silent. Claire had one hand pressed flat to her sternum. Her husband, Philip, was holding a beer he'd stopped drinking. My mother had both hands over her mouth. My father stood 8 feet from me. He looked like a man watching something he couldn't reconcile with anything he already understood. And the honest truth, the thing I couldn't have anticipated, was that it didn't feel the way I'd imagined. I'd built some version of this moment in the back of my mind over the years. Imagined what it would feel like if he ever truly understood the scale of what I'd done. But standing there, all I felt was a strange, hollow ache, like arriving somewhere you'd been walking toward for years, and finding it wasn't what you thought it would look like. Veterans came across the room one by one. An older man with a Legion of Merit pin introduced me to his wife, and told me his son was applying to West Point. A woman in her 70s gripped my hand and said her late husband would have been proud to know me. The ROTC cadet asked if he could shake my hand, and was shaking slightly himself when he did it. The man whose brother I'd barely remembered stepped back and said, "Thank you," in a way that had nothing to do with rank, and everything to do with being a person who'd made a choice at the right moment. Around 8:30, I slipped outside to the garden on the side of the building. November air, cool and dry, string lights in the oak trees. The noise of the party went soft behind me. Terrence appeared 4 minutes later, with 2 cups of coffee from somewhere inside. "How did you know where I'd be?" I asked. "You always go to the exit when things get real," he said, and handed me a cup. We stood in the quiet for a while. "You okay?" he asked. That question hit somewhere unguarded. "I don't know," I said honestly. I thought if he ever actually saw it, saw what this means, what it costs, I'd feel something different, something better than this. "What do you feel?" I thought about it. Like I spent a lot of years waiting for a permission slip I never actually needed. Terrence nodded. He didn't offer anything about his own father, but I know enough of his history to understand why he didn't. Footsteps on the path. I turned expecting my mother. It was Claire, holding her heels in one hand, because she always abandons them by hour 2 of any event. Terrence quietly stepped away. We stood at the garden railing without talking for a moment. Down the street, someone was setting off early fireworks from a neighbor's party. In the trees above us, the string lights moved in the wind. "I owe you an apology," Claire said. I waited. "I have spent my whole life asking you to make yourself smaller. Asking you to leave things at the door, not make Dad uncomfortable, keep the peace." Her voice was even, but I could hear what was underneath it. I told myself I was protecting the family. But what I was actually doing was choosing his comfort over your reality. Every single time. That landed somewhere deep and quiet. "Claire, let me finish." She looked at her hands. "I used to think he loved me more because I was somehow more deserving. Like his attention and his pride were things I'd earned that you hadn't." She shook her head. "What I actually understand now is that he didn't love me more, he just understood me more. And he confused those 2 things. And I let him, because it was easier." The truth of it settled over me, slow and painful, the way real things usually do. "You have always been the brave one," she said. "I should have said that out loud 20 years ago." My mother appeared at the garden door about 10 minutes later. She was holding a paper napkin she'd been folding into smaller and smaller squares without seeming to notice. She came to stand beside me at the railing and looked at the dark street for a long moment before she spoke. "I have a folder on my phone," she said quietly. I turned. "Every time your name appeared in a base press release, or a local news article, or anything public, I saved it." She didn't look at me. "I've had it for 4 years. 43 items. She paused. "Your father doesn't know." "Why didn't you ever say anything?" Her voice went soft. "Because he can't talk about it without getting upset, and if I brought it up, I'd have to explain why it upsets him. And then I'd have to tell you things that aren't mine to tell." She looked at me then. "But I have never stopped being proud of you. Not for one single day." She went back inside before I could answer. I stood there in the cold, turning what she'd said over carefully. Things that aren't mine to tell. My father came out 20 minutes after that. Roy Marsh does not do quiet conversations easily. He coaches, he instructs, he manages situations. He stood beside me at that garden railing for what felt like 2 solid minutes without speaking, which for him is the emotional equivalent of a significant confession. Then he said, "I had a brother named Paul." I had known about Uncle Paul the way you know about relatives who are never discussed. A vague awareness. An absence that no one explains. He died when I was 3. No one had ever told me how. Desert Storm, my father said. January 1991. He was 22 years old. He stopped. He was the kind of person that made everything feel lighter just by walking in. My parents' house felt different when he was in it, and they sent him to the Gulf, and 3 weeks into the ground campaign. He stopped again. His jaw moved. They sent a chaplain to my parents' door. I was the one who answered it. I didn't move. When you told me you were in ROTC, it felt like the floor dropped. He looked at the street. Not because I doubted you. You were always the most capable person in any room. I knew that when you were 8 years old. His voice was deliberate, like he was choosing each word carefully, because I had watched my brother go and not come back. And I genuinely could not, go through that possibility again, even the chance of it. The architecture of 31 years rearranged itself in about 4 seconds. So you made it impossible to talk about, I said. Not an accusation, just the only accurate thing. I made a lot of things impossible, he said. You wanted me to be proud of you. And I was so terrified of losing you that I couldn't get past it to say so. I chose the fear, every time. We stood in the cold for a while. You could have told me, I said eventually. I know. He nodded once, the way coaches nod when they've made an error they can't take back. I know that now. The next morning I was loading my car in the hotel parking lot before 7. Old habit, when footsteps crossed the asphalt behind me. My father, in a fleece jacket, and his old Gallatin baseball cap, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the lobby machine. He handed me one without speaking. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and took out a photograph, folded once down the middle. Paul, in his army uniform, maybe 19 years old, grinning at the camera with both hands shoved into his pockets like he had all the time in the world. On the back, in my father's handwriting, he would have loved knowing you made it. I looked up at my father. I should have said that the day you commissioned, he said. His voice was rough at the edges. I should have said it every year since. I didn't know how. I held the photograph carefully and thought about all the phone calls I'd shortened. All the homecomings I hadn't mentioned because I didn't want to meet his silence. All the years I'd told myself his opinion had stopped mattering to me. When the truth was it had never stopped mattering for a single day. It matters to me now, I said, that you're saying it. His eyes went red at the corners. He nodded. Claire arrived 10 minutes later carrying breakfast sandwiches from the diner 2 blocks away, still in yesterday's mascara, deeply unbothered. She hugged me for a long time. Told me to call more often. I said I'd try. She said that wasn't good enough, made me promise to text when I got back to post, then made my father promise to actually answer when I called on Sundays. He said he would. I believed him. I drove north on I-65 with the morning light cutting low and flat across the fields, Tennessee widening out into the long, pale stretch of early November. I turned something over for most of that drive. Something I hadn't been able to say clearly in 31 years of living inside it. The part of me that had spent years waiting for my father to see me had cost something real. Not my career, not my confidence in the field. Those were mine and they stayed mine. But there was a version of myself that had been quietly cupped around an old wound for a long time, protecting it, keeping it from closing. Somewhere between a garden railing and a folded photograph in a parking lot, I'd finally let someone say the words the wound son had always been waiting for. It didn't fix 31 years. I want to be honest about that. Hurt that old doesn't dissolve in one November evening. But it changed the shape of those years, made room in them for something other than just the waiting. About 2 hours out, I stopped at a gas station just south of Nashville. A teenage girl behind the counter saw my uniform and straightened up, slightly uncertain how to react. My little brother wants to enlist, she said after a moment. He's 17. I keep trying to talk him out of it. I looked at her. Young, carrying the specific anxiety of someone who loves a person she can't protect from their own choices. It's a hard life, I said honestly, and it'll mean something to him. Both of those things are true at the same time. She chewed her lip. Did your family support you? I thought about a man in a fleece jacket handing me bad hotel coffee in a parking lot, and a photograph of a boy who didn't come home, with something written on the back that took 31 years to say out loud. They got there, I said. She nodded slowly, like that was enough. Maybe it was. I got back in my car and pulled out onto the interstate, and for the first time in longer than I could measure, the drive back to Post didn't feel like leaving. It felt like arriving somewhere I'd been heading all along. A life I had built on my own terms, in my own time, without waiting for anyone's permission to call it mine.